This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. How are you doing this fine kind of spring day?
I guess I'm okay. I'm just I got as you know, I got a lot of stuff that I'm working on. I'm chipping away at it. So I guess that's good. It's beautiful out. I'm kind of didn't sleep so well last night. I usually sleep well. I don't know what that was about, but
Uh, you know,
I was
maybe a
wait
problem to you. It's a way
I
of life for me.
yeah, I was waking up all the time, but I wasn't I didn't I could fall right back to sleep. I don't know what the fuck that was.
Yeah, welcome to my reality. Maybe it's your age. The older you get, the less sleep you need.
Maybe that's what it is.
Anyway, it's easy to understand if people aren't getting very much sleep in this day and age when so much
Well,
is so fucking fucked up. But speaking of stupidity, of which we hear about 24/7 now, if you turn on any news channel, I think this is the most ridiculous thing I've heard. Have you, Timothy, who knows everything, heard of the forbidden unlawful representation of role playing in education, also known as the Furries Act?
I didn't know there was a law against that. Okay.
Well, a bill introduced, where would you think? What state? Give it a guess. What's one of
Te-
the
Texas,
guess? Say it.
Texas.
What? A bill introduced into the Texas House of
All
Representatives,
right.
backed by Governor idiot Greg Abbott, would ban non human behavior in schools, including barking and other practices common amongst furries. All right. So it would prohibit students from barking, hissing, meowing, wearing leashes for or tails at public schools. I didn't know it was such a big issue. It also specifies that student cannot use litter boxes or licking as means of self-care on school grounds. So schools across the country have repeatedly debunked claims of litter box installations for student use since it was first flagged during a bizarre meeting in a Michigan school district in 2022. But like most Republicans, it doesn't matter how big or small the lie is, they're just going to fucking repeat it.
Well, I mean,
So only school mascots and dress up performances,
that's
including
stupid.
Halloween and certain theme spirit weeks, are exempted.
Yeah,
Ridiculous.
I mean, well, to me, because I've never even heard of such a this being an issue at all, and if it can be disruptive and it's meowing or barking, I mean, come on, just deal with it. You don't have to,
No litter boxes. The
go
thing is,
all the way to the
when
top. No, but what I'm getting at is this is a totally projection of clearly his sexuality or something because because he's paralyzed from the waist down. He's probably doing all types of role playing in his bedroom because he's what else he's gonna fucking do? So I just think it's some projection about
well, when you
what he
have
is.
in positions of power in the White House both a predator and then probably an
Oh,
autistic
rapist.
virgin that only IVFs the 14 kids he has and doesn't pay any attention to them and doesn't pay for anything. And why should he care about American children? Because he doesn't.
He doesn't.
You
No,
know,
he doesn't. Well, for all the people out there that think musicians who are on even ones that fill arenas or on TV, they just got it made. People don't realize how tough it is financially. How financially tough it is for musicians. Dawn Robinson, who was the lead singer of the '90s R&B sensation En Vogue,
oh, yeah.
she announced on social media she's been living in a car for the last 3 years. She had kind of ran out of the money and who knows all types of tax issues, and she moved with her folks who she had moved to a trail or like some place in Vegas, and then I think now they're like in some nursing home, and she went back to L.A. to see her friends, and she just couldn't afford what the
Nobody's going to help her. And the thing is,
prices
it doesn't
are.
matter. A group that was that big, first of all, they probably got ripped off left, right, and center.
Sure.
Bad choices, overspend when they get the money, act silly, and then they're left with nothing. And again, this financial amnesia that people have, which I'm sure she had a lot of friends in the industry, aren't stepping in to give somebody a hand up. But
Well,
that is the way it is.
I saw an interview with her, and I interviewed with her, and of course, how am I supposed to totally tell? But my hunch, she didn't have like some insane drug problem. She's very articulate. I just think,
Yeah, but so many homeless people who are living in their cars don't have
yeah,
drug issues, are not mentally unstable, are paycheck. We're one paycheck away from being
sure,
homeless,
sure,
and then there we are, and that is this country. As billionaires, spend $70 million golfing and
right.
lying about it and cheating, and then cut every social service that could possibly protect the America that they won't give a raise to, that they won't give, solid jobs to, and that is basically being, fucked left, right, and center.
Well, it's ridiculous because the other night, actually, I was leaving Simon's. I was getting some files of the podcast actually from him. I needed it to do it for reasons. Maybe, hopefully, I'll let you know soon. But
You better.
anyhow, I was coming home on the subway, and every car was filled because it was raining with
Yeah.
homeless people. None of them were in that, sometimes there's some crazy homeless person who's screaming at and punching air, and you're like, yeah, I'm gonna change the car. None of that. They're
No,
just,
just
it's
homeless.
late at night and they're sleeping on the benches. Now, so it's one of these things where Adams is clearing a lot of these
Yeah, benches. They're clearing
they're
seating in subways and putting in a metal bar to stand on.
so they're clearing all this stuff, and they're clearing all these little tent city things that are kind of popping up in different places. And then he's at the same time, he's like, okay, well, I don't want people to be afraid to take the subway, so I'm putting cops in there. So my subway link train, every car, I've never seen it this many, was filled with homeless people on the bench. And then there's two cars where there was two cops each, and they just look bored. They're standing there. No homeless people were in those ones, but they weren't going and like harassing them. It was just
Well,
like this
and the thing is, where are
perversion
they
of
supposed
policy. Right,
where are
exactly.
people supposed to go? And look, there are violent, homeless maniacs out there, and there's just a lot of millions of unfortunate people. And the thing is, I don't know the most recent statistic about the number of homeless people in this country, but it's massive. But when you consider how many other countries have homeless people in refugee camps, mostly women and children, it is a very sad and
Oh, just
ridiculous
so
situation.
so I finally reached my stop, and I'm walking, and I'm just about to get home. I'm walking by this bus stop, and an old man, he probably was home. I don't know, but at the time,
Yeah,
and
it's
he
raining,
really
it's late.
he didn't look all fucked up, look normal, but he's like, I'm having a heart attack.
Oh my
I'm
gosh.
like, oh my God. And I'm like, oh, is this guy lying? But then, like, if he's not, he goes, I need you to call 911.
Oh my God. That
and
that, that is going to bankrupt him, so we will be homeless.
yeah, I'm like, he goes, please, I'm having a heart attack. I'm like, whatever this age, please. So I was like, oh, okay, I'll call 911. I call them. They're like, I'm like, I don't know if he's telling the truth, but I don't know. I don't feel comfortable leaving this guy. It's not,
Yeah.
because I can usually tell a street scam when I see one. And I was also thinking, he's not asking me for any money. He's not asking for
Right.
anything.
It's asking to live.
So I call and I said, listen, I don't know. Is he breathing? Yeah, I don't know if he's telling the truth, but well, we'll send someone anyways. And it didn't end up taking much of my time. It was like 2 minutes in, an ambulance is there. I give him the
That's
location.
amazing. Yep.
And these EMTs and they pull up, but they take a second to get out. I'm like, well, come on, this guy might be having a heart
Yeah.
attack. And then they get out, and I go like, listen, I don't know, I don't know this guy.
Just trying to help.
I don't know. And sure enough, the EMT is like, yeah. He goes, thank you very much for doing this. You did the right thing. But this is the second time I picked this guy up this week. And what I realized was it was rainy and cold, and he was probably homeless, and he just needed a place to stay because he wasn't going to be charged. He wasn't going to, the taxpayer's going to pick it up because the whole system's just fucked. Basically everything's.
Well, I just came from Seattle last weekend. I was there showing artist depression, anxiety, and rage at the Rabbit Box, one of my favorite clubs in America. And somebody was telling me a story about how they were on a bus, they slipped, they broke their foot, they had to call an ambulance. What do you think the charge for an ambulance is? Because I thought, oh, maybe 400. What do you think it was?
Oh, I think it varies considerably. It's not very regulated.
Five fucking $1,000.
Oh, I hope the person had insurance.
That's how much they still had to pay. Are you shitting me?
Well, also their deductible's insane. Oh fuck.
Ridiculous. I mean, whatever. It's
Their deductible is $5,000. Oh,
what to do. What to do. I mean, this is why there's so much poverty in this country because the shysters at the top, especially medical profession, American medical profession, big pharma, billionaire bullshit bromances, which I have to say, I'm so happy none of us invest, that the stock market is tanking, but I'm still hoping Anonymous will step in and just wipe the whole fucking thing out. That would really level the playing field. Praying now to Anonymous.
Well, I mean, it's
Get in there.
So you have all this kind of all this recklessness in power, and of course the markets are showing that people
Well,
are
by the way,
people are
speaking about
nervous.
recklessness, there were
Yeah.
actually 21 people that resigned before Musk set up his bed in the White House that were on his staff because they just like we cannot even be a part of this. That's how corrupt it is. When even his boy bros have to
Oh my
just take
God.
themselves out.
Well,
And almost everything they've tried to do has been shot down. Of course, it's always fire, hire 2 days later.
yeah, but
Damage done.
they're ignoring the judge's orders. They're
What?
ignoring the
Of
they're
course. Well,
ignoring
and I
the
hope
judge's
that
orders.
results in conviction.
So you would hope the streets would be packed right now, which they are in Serbia right now. All Hungary, Serbia, Romania, Georgia, everything is boiling right now. It's really insane.
Yeah.
In Serbia,
Yeah.
it was something like what 300,000-400,000 students in the streets because the a train station collapsed and killed a bunch of people. Meanwhile, the leaders are corrupt. They're getting all the money. They're cutting all these corners in infrastructure, killing people, and then they're driving around with their armed guard limos. This corruption's out of control. The students show up, and there's video that they used sonic weapons against them.
Yeah.
So this is
well, and it's no wonder that I don't know how many Trump has, but supposedly, the autistic bro buddy has like 5 armed guards with him at all times because they know they are hated. And what's going to be interesting is their so-called peeps are going to be turning against them soon because everybody will be suffering. All right, you know what? You're so for guns and you're so for militias. You better watch your asses. Yeah.
I don't know.
Confront the cockocracy. What else?
I have a Florida story.
Well, go ahead. Get it over with.
Well, this is where we're at. So, Sarah Morale, a pregnant librarian.
Poor thing.
She's her hormones were probably going a little nuts. She had some little road rage with a bunch of guys on their motorbikes, and then the guy kind of pulled parallel with her and was driving for a while, and
but she was driving, and
they're both road raging each other, sticking middle finger out, fuck you, and then she kind of lost her cool and basically nudged him, and somehow he managed. On a
motorcycle or no?
He was on a motorcycle. Somehow, even though he got a little bump, he still managed to stay upright. But then he was furious, and his buddies were furious, and they followed her home. At which point she's like calling 911. It's like, these bikers are following me home. It's like, well, you almost killed one lady, but and what do where's this gonna go?
Well, yeah.
Runs to the front yard. Grandma, or soon to be grandma, or her mom's there. It's Florida. Comes out with a gun and feels emboldened. You're on my property, blah blah blah. One of the bikers, he's carrying, everyone's carrying, and he ends up unloading into the pregnant mom. She's dead. But he gets arrested, but he has a license to carry. And he's like, well, she pulled the gun on me and she tried to hit me and I'm holding my ground. So it's basically everyone felt it never had to go this far. And everyone felt emboldened because they have these guns on them and they thought they could just constantly, they have a fantasy of
and again, look, the thing is, I'm all for rage, but why is it always in the wrong direction? People are getting so rageful. Take it to the stage or take it to the corporations or take it to those that need to be taken out. Don't take it out on another hapless fucking driver or victim. This is what pisses me off.
Well,
it's like
grandma
road rage, pathetic.
Grandma was probably a real gun nut herself because she's the one that came out with a gun.
Can you blame her? No.
And all the policies, and I don't know, but there's a good chance she voted. I mean, the majority voted for DeSantis, and the majority in Florida likes the hold your ground rule.
Yeah.
And that just, no pun intended, backfired. I mean, this is like, all these people voted for these things. This guy just killed a pregnant woman. He's probably some Christian, So these are all disasters.
Well,
waiting to blow back in people's faces.
They proclaim World War III is coming. I proclaim it is already here. So watch out, watch your back. And you got to watch your mouth too, because there's crazy fuckers out there, whether with a screwdriver, wanted to push you onto the subway tracks, or wanted to blow your face off, no matter who or what you are. So that's where we are now. And I don't know what to do about it because I am not a solutionist. I am just the bearer of real news. And so with that, this is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl. This is the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch and Tim Dahl, and I'm very excited to have Adam Sobel because I always tell people don't become a musician, become a scientist, a doctor. But what's interesting about Adam is he has a family history of music, we'll say, going back to no wave. We'll get into that. And then as a climate scientist at Columbia University. So it's kind of like we're going to talk about from no wave to the wave of disasters just in the past week. Hello, Adam.
Hi, Lydia. Thanks so much for having me.
Yes.
Thank you. Let's start at the beginning. You were 10 years old, and your uncle was Sumner Crane of what I think was the first no wave band, and certainly my favorite no wave band, Mars, who were fantastic. I mean, that was probably the best recording on the No New York record with the Contortions, DNA, Teenage Jesus, Mars. I saw Mars and I saw Suicide, and I knew the path I would take, sounding nothing like either of them, but still. And I was a very good friend with Sumner. And in our talking, because you started a Sumner Crane, who was the guitar player, lead vocalist, you started some episodic podcasts about Sumner's creative talents, which were many and very diverse. So, welcome to the show. And here we go. Tell us about when you were 10.
Right. So Sumner was my uncle. He was my mother's younger brother. So I knew him, from as early as I can remember. But yeah, when I was 10, that's when Mars happened. So I was born in 67. So they started performing in 77. So I was aware of it. And in fact, we went to hear them. I was either 10 or 11. I'm not sure exactly the date, but we went to CBGB's, my mom and my sister and my grandfather, who was Sumner's father, who was a classical musician who could not get with it. Could not appreciate.
Could not get with the program of
What,
Mars.
was he a professional classical musician, or was he just a?
He was a teacher. He gave lessons when my mom and Sumner were young, and then at some point he became a high school teacher, and he ran the orchestra at Andrew Jackson High School in Queens. I don't think he was ever a professional performer.
Okay,
but he played piano and violin.
Yep. Sure.
But what's so amazing about not only Sumner, but Mars in general is throw everything out you know about music and create something completely unique and kind of schizophrenic. The charm of it all.
Yep. I mean, we have recordings. I mean, unfortunately, most of them are lost, but my grandfather had a reel-to-reel tape deck, and he used to record his children, and only one survives. But I have a recording of Sumner playing with a friend when he was 13. And it's like Jerry Lee Lewis and Elvis songs on piano and guitar.
Oh, all right.
So many sides to Sumner Crane. My experience with Sumner as just somebody who was, implanted myself on the scene at the same time was, first of all, not only was he one of the most bizarre, unique musicians creating my favorite no wave band, but he was a painter of so many different styles. And his music, he also had many different styles of music. I mean, speak about beyond a split personality. This guy was channeling so many different things. Let's talk about the paintings for a minute, and then we'll go back to the music. Because if I recall from your podcast, you said that you actually had one or two of his paintings in your house as a child.
Yeah, we had a few. So Sumner's history with painting, he started, I don't know when it started, but as early as music, I think. So I think he got started through comic books. He was into comic books as a young kid, and he started drawing comic book figures, and then he started painting, I don't know, probably as a teenager. And when he was probably in his late teens and he moved out of home, he was a student at a place called the New York Studio School, which started in 64. And we think Sumner was probably the very first class there, or maybe the second, but it was a sort of a renegade school started by students who felt they were getting too much theory and not enough actual painting and sculpting and drawing. Yeah. So he became a student of this guy, Milton Resnick, who's an abstract expressionist, quite famous still, yes. Kind of almost as famous as like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning, but he was buddies of those guys, and he's in MoMA and all that stuff. So Sumner knew him very, very well. I have 3 recordings of Sumner interviewing him in the early 80s, which we hope to release. And he painted during his early 20s. He was painting kind of like Resnick. In fact, I could show them to you if I could move, because they're actually in Actually, my
Well, you're going to be
mom's.
posting some of these paintings soon on your podcast, which is called
Right.
Deep Convection, which is a podcast. First of all, it was a podcast for your climate
Right.
scientific investigations, and now it is becoming also the housing of your Sumner Crane investigations.
Right.
One thing about back to the comic books, one of Sumner's styles was absolutely perfectly drawn pop art comic like
Right.
Lichtenstein. I mean, it was so accurate to that. But
Right.
then I also remember paintings that he had that were like 3 inches thick that looked like just brown bark with little colors in here and there. That's
Right.
only two of the styles he had.
Well, those are two different. I mean, so yeah, so the ones that you're describing, the brown bark, were those are very Resnick influenced because Resnick did that huge canvases with tons, many layers of paint, often getting to be almost like one color by the time he mushed it around. So Sumner did ones like that and other ones that were kind of very abstract. Then the pop arts, the comic book ones, I believe all of the ones we know of, those were reproductions of comics by a guy named Bob Powell, who was one of Sumner's artistic heroes, who did horror comics and other kinds of comics in the 50s and 60s. I think he died in the 60s. Anyway, then Sumner did abstract, and to finish the story, later, after the no wave time, in the 80s and beyond, he went back to figurative, and he had a few different phases, but his paintings are very, he did scenes from life. He did portraits and landscapes and scenes from novels. He painted his friends a lot. So Connie Berg is in a lot of them. She posed for
Connie
him.
Berg, who is, also an initial member of Mars, who I also recorded The Drowning of Lucy Hamilton with, still one of my favorite people on the planet and long time.
So you
Nikki
see her
sister.
face you see her face in the paintings. You see Rudolph Gray in the paintings. You see Sumner himself. He would put himself in them sometimes. I think Ardo's in one of them.
Rudolph Gray and Sumner were a very unusual combination because they were just two of the most outside of everything, both musically and just as far as their intellectual capacity. Rudolph Gray, as we know, wrote the book on Ed Wood that became then a film with Johnny Depp in it. But yeah, Sumner took me in for a while as I was a nomading teen terrorist about to forge Teenage Jesus. And I have to say, it was an amusing escapade, an episode, an adventure in my life. And then you started hearing about me, who I was just a troublemaker at the time when you weren't much older than 10.
I heard your name at 10 or 11. Yes, I've known who you were since my childhood, Lydia, and that's why it's such a big deal for me to meet you at this.
Oh, no biggie to me, honey.
Had you not,
it's a big deal. Big deal for me to meet a climate scientist.
So you never met before?
I don't think so. Not to my knowledge, unless it was maybe at the memorial. Were you at the memorial? Maybe.
No, I don't think I was living in New York then. And if it was at CBGB's, I mean, I was just trying to get away from the smell of dog shit. So, So after seeing Mars, and then for a little while, you had a slight fixation on becoming a musician. It's in your family anyway, and you realized wisely what a wrong path that was to take.
Right.
Even though you did end up playing at CBGB's a couple of times.
So I was the second family member to play in CBGB's. We had a high school rock band. I mean, this was by the early 80s. The scene was very different. It was a big deal to us, but it didn't have the significance that, you guys did a few years, although it wasn't that much later. When I played it, I felt like it was eons later than when Sumner had been there, but it was like 5 or 6 years later. I mean,
then it was a long period of time. Let's go back to when you're 10 and you heard Mars. What does a 10-year-old think of that? Because when you're 10, you're kind of living in chaos anyway.
My memory is not that clear, but I remember the look of the club. I remember that it was very loud. I remember that we were kind of way far back. It was kind of a long
Parents
space.
in horror.
Yep.
Parents in horror.
No, I don't think my mother was in horror, but my grandfather probably was. He was sticking things in his ears, and I just remember, I don't remember the music vividly. I mean, now I've listened to it, so I know what it sounds like, so I can imagine that I remember it, but I don't. I just remember it being loud. But I do remember thinking, wow, Sumner's up there on the stage. This is cool. This is a big deal. It seemed like it seemed meaningful.
I have a bizarre theory here that since the sound of Mars was kind of like an oral tornado or a hurricane. Perhaps that's why you pursued climate science. I'm not sure. Maybe that impregnated you in a different way than just hearing, some rock band would have. I'm not sure. I'm going to put that in there and give it a
Well,
go.
as you say, I've been doing this project on Sumner. It started, about a year ago, and I've started been doing research on him and kind of talking to people. And I think I'm going to write a book about him. And in the course of this, as you say, I tried to be a musician. I had that high school experience. I was into jazz. I gave it up in about my mid 20s, but I was pretty serious from about late teens through mid 20s. And then I went back to being a scientist. But I was always interested in science from being a young
Well,
kid too.
what's interesting is so you have Milton Babbitt and say serialists and
Right.
and they're like there's a crossover of science and music and I'm just curious actually not to digress but real quickly with your grandfather he's around culture he's around the New York area and with Bernstein exposing things like Ives to the general public or you have like Elliot Carter it's just these people are hovering around. What was this music so weird to him?
Well, that's interesting. I don't know. I mean, I can't speak for my grandfather. He's been dead for 30 plus years, but
I'm glad
what
he's
I
not still speaking to you, though, and that's a relief.
No, he's not speaking to me. I think he and Sumner actually, I think they had a difficult relationship when Sumner was a kid. And I know this because I've read Sumner's journals that he wrote later about it. But I think they kind of reconciled and were close in later years. And actually, when he was dying around 1990 of cancer, Sumner moved up to the Catskills where he was and took care of him for several months, which, if you knew Sumner well, we didn't kind of think of him as like a caregiver, but he was. It was really a big, huge thing for the family. I mean, but what I wanted to say about Babbitt and all that, I don't know. I mean, I think my grandfather was definitely an intellectual guy. One thing though, so Morton Feldman was one of that scene, and Feldman
Totally.
was actually a teacher of Sumner's because at the New York Studio School, where Sumner was a student for several years, and I think probably hung out for longer than that, for several years, Feldman was the dean. It's quite weird.
Whoa. Was
So
he
Feldman,
he was also teaching at Brooklyn College, maybe at the same time, or maybe not. I don't know.
he
I think
went later. I don't know about Brooklyn College. Later, he went up to I want to say Rochester or Syracuse or somewhere like that. But at this
okay.
time,
Could have been Buffalo.
it was maybe Buffalo.
I think it was Buffalo.
For several years, he was the dean, and it was during Sumner's time. And it's really interesting because it tells you something about No Wave. It tells you something I think about Sumner's, like how
Yeah.
how he integrated these influences because the studio school had no music. It was a visual art school only, and Feldman did no visual art. He was a musician only, but he was a buddy of John Cage, and they were both hung out with like Philip Guston and these
Yep.
different these abstract painters. So all of the arts were very close to each other. There was not that much of a boundary, and it seemed to me that looking, reading about it now, I didn't really understand this at the time, but the no wave scene was, wasn't just music, right? There was filmmakers and theater people and everything kind of all mushed
Photographers,
together.
everything.
And you
Now,
can
when
see how
you,
that came naturally,
You,
to
you can
Sumner.
see, and you can see how it just all those cross contaminations, I should say. I mean, not to digress, but how the fuck did Feldman get a dean a gig with that? I mean, is it nepotism? It must be.
I think it was a very small school. So, I mean, it was, a few dozen students. And I don't know, the original founder was this painter named Mercedes Matter, and I don't know that much about her. They must have been friends. I don't know. I don't know how it happened.
Okay.
now, Adam, when you said you got into jazz, like first of all, what did you get into first as a kid? All right, you see Mars, whatever it does to the inside of your brain. But what
Yeah.
was the first music you were actually into? And then I want to talk about what kind of jazz you did get into,
Okay.
and having as you called it, a rock and roll band. So
Right. Well, when I was really little, when I was really little, I just used to like to sing songs, at home. But then I played the violin for a few years. That was my grandfather's influence, but I was terrible. I couldn't get, I that didn't get anywhere. And then, when I was 11, at my school they formed a band. One of these bands where one teacher teaches all the kids to play the instrument. So I started playing trumpet because my other friends weren't playing that. So I thought and I wasn't very good, but the whole band was terrible, so it was fine. And it's at that point, this was like the late 70s. So it was about the Mars time. I don't know. I started listening to the pop music that was on the radio, whatever, Electric Light Orchestra or whatever, Joe Jackson. I can't, whatever that stuff was. But then, that got into more. I had different phases. I had like a Grateful Dead phase and a whatever. But at some point, I decided I was either going to be serious about this or not. And because I was playing the trumpet, I started getting into jazz, and that became a connection with Sumner because he loved that, and especially free jazz, but he knew all of it. Thelonious Monk was a hero of his. He had heard like Coltrane and Monk and all these guys play in the 60s and 70s, and so that became a connection. Also comic books. He got me into comic books at about, as a kid. I'll tell you one more Sumner story. So when I was probably 9 or 10, Sumner gave me a couple issues of the X-Men, and which is a comic that's now, famous. But at the time, it had undergone a reboot. It was originally started in the 60s. It was kind of a cheesy superhero comic, but then around the late 70s, it became kind of darker and more interesting with new characters. And actually now, well, yeah, anyway, I'll skip that story. But so that got me. So Sumner, like, he was giving me them because he was into them, not because I was a kid. He was just sharing. And so I got into comic books, and I started drawing comic books, comic characters, as he had when he was a kid. And I did it for a few years, and I got sort of okay, and then I quit as a teenager. But I never saved any of those drawings, and my parents didn't either, so I had no record of it. The one comic book superhero drawing that I had was saved by Sumner, and I got it back in this last year because it was in his stuff, and then his widow, my Aunt Sue, gave me all this stuff, years and years after his death, and there it was in an envelope by itself that said Adam Art on it, my drawing. So the reason I tell that story is to show that my thesis about Sumner, you tell me, Lydia and Tim, what you think of this, is that for him, every relationship was about art in one way or another. He connected with everybody through art. If you did any arty thing or had an interest, that's what he would connect with you about, and it was very important to him. And that's one example I have of it. But the music, yeah, so the jazz, and then that was kind of my main thing. I mean, I did different things. When I was in my early 20s, I played in a salsa band for a little while. And I ended up
all over the board. You were all over everything. You were just trying to find your niche. And finally, did I hear this in the Sumner episode that's up now on Deep Convection, that Storm was one of your favorite characters in the comic books? And that makes sense.
That
Storm
happened later. Yeah.
Okay,
that happened later
well,
because she controls the weather. So when I got into this field, I didn't start studying meteorology until I was in my late 20s. But then, yeah, I mean, looking back on it, I was like, oh, she controls the weather. So she became my favorite.
Well, I've been for a long time talking about Mother Nature's revenge, and we are seeing it across the board. Even in this last week alone, the last few days alone, 1,500 storms across America, 80, they're still counting, tornadoes, dust storms, 130 fires in Oklahoma and Texas. What the hell is going on other than Mother Nature's revenge against the cockocracy? What's up? Adam, what's up?
What's up?
I mean, I know it's a big question.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fill us in,
so I do study extreme weather events and their relation to climate and climate change. And of course, the planet is getting hotter. And so some kinds of events, you can definitely see the fingerprint already. I mean, heat waves are, hotter and more frequent. That's already plain in the data. Heavy
Melting
rain
glaciers.
Events. What's that?
The melting glaciers.
Oh yeah, for sure, for sure. Yeah, well,
forest
things like
fires,
that.
dust storms.
Yeah. The fires have been shocking. I mean, that to me has been the most shocking of anything because it was, it's one of these things where there's so many uncertainties in climate science. We know it's getting warmer, but we don't know everything about how that manifests. And so sometimes the people who don't sort of want to believe it sometimes say, well, you guys don't know everything, it's uncertain. But the uncertainty often means it's worse than we think. And the fires are an example. Right. So because everybody always predicted, okay, the planet gets hotter, there's going to be more fires and worse fires. But I don't think anybody predicted until it happened just how bad it would get, how quickly. Right. That in the last 5-10 years, the West has been just one set of awful fires after another. And that's probably not all climate change. I mean, there's other factors, but it's almost certainly a big part of it. And it's really, I don't think anybody expected it to be this quick, this bad.
When there's 130 fires this weekend through Oklahoma and Texas,
oh,
I mean,
wow.
that becomes pretty freaking undeniable that we're in it. We're really in it. When a storm is big enough to go from Tampa, Florida to Boston, we're in it. When we're having forest fires on one coast, blizzards in the middle, and then more wind damage and so many power outages as well the last few days. that and unfortunately, where is it hitting? It's hitting in a lot of the poorer states: Mississippi, Alabama, Tennessee,
Mm. Yeah. Well, those
by
places are,
FEMA.
yeah, those are the places that are more susceptible, especially to in this time of year to tornadoes and hail and those kind of events. And there's probably some kind of climate change signal in those, but we don't understand that very well. I
You
would
know what,
say,
I find,
yeah.
Adam, interesting is, you know, some people are saying maybe we're in something similar to the Roaring Twenties, heading into
Mm,
a Great Depression again. And what went
mm.
along with that was
Dust
the Dust Bowl and a drought
Bowl.
and all. And so, like,
Right.
are we going to have this similar collision of geopolitical incidences, economic collapse, and
Good question. Good
environmental
question, Tim.
catastrophe?
I feel like, yeah, we're already there to some degree. I don't know if of another dust bowl, but with the drought in the Southwest, I mean, the Southwest has been in an on-off sort of state of drought for a while now, and a lot of the development, a lot of the growth that happened. I mean, there's so many people living in the Southwest didn't used to be like that, and a lot of that development happened in an unusually wet period, and so we're bouncing back from that at this, and it's going back to being drier at the same time as it's hotter, so that
Getting
just
hotter.
dries out everything more. So I yeah, I mean it's pretty distressing,
It's
especially.
desperate. I read an article yesterday that said we used to worry about acid rain. Now we have to worry about microplastic rain.
Well,
Oh,
acid rain. I'm glad you brought up acid rain because
thank you.
acid rain is well, it's to make another point. Acid rain is a great success story. Acid rain got cleaned up by government regulation.
Yeah.
There was the Clean Air Act and they and other regulations. They reduced the sulfur coming out of smokestacks, and acid rain's not really a problem anymore in the Northeast where it was when I was a kid. And that's an example of how you can fix these things. And with
But the ignorant public will say, well, "What happened to acid rain?" They actually don't know what you just said,
yeah,
and I kind of want to, just as a your personal relationship with what you do. Isn't it true that it's like an overwhelming consensus in the science community about what's happening with man-made global warming? And
hmm
how was this politicized? How can these few maybe denier scientists that they use to quote all the time to justify their quote unquote opinion? Um, how did the scientific community even allow this, or they got
And what can
bullied?
they do about it? Yeah.
yeah. What can we do about it? The best book about this is by Naomi Oreskes and Eric Conway. It's called Merchants of Doubt, and what it shows is that the people who are the quote unquote experts who are the most responsible for climate denial are the same people who were involved in the previous denial movements. So smoking, the people
Okay.
who questioned the science that
Yes.
smoking
Yes.
is bad for you,
Yep.
and then acid rain, and then ozone. It's sort of it became an industry of and a strategy of casting doubt on the science. Like you don't, the strategy was you don't actually have to prove the science is wrong. You just have to make people believe that different experts believe different things, and they just get
Yeah,
confused.
it's subjective or something.
And so
And
it's
also, who's paying them to deny this anyway? Like, what hand is in their pocket? What pocket are their hands in to
Oil
allow them to
industry.
deny exactly the damage already being done constantly, every day, every week, every month?
right. I mean, that's interesting too. I mean, the fossil fuel industry is definitely ultimately responsible for this. I'm not sure that all the people doing the denial, the scientists who were the voice necessarily made that much money from it. That's I don't know that. Some of them were really ideologically believed that any government regulation is akin to communism, and
Ugh,
therefore, it was
that's
an
a strange
ideological
one.
thing. A lot of them were. Some of them were Cold War. Cold War kind of neocon
Hangovers.
arms physicists.
Ugh.
Okay. Yeah,
Who
but they all love Teddy Roosevelt, who did regulations on the robber barons, and so it's like
did
it's so.
they? I don't. Yeah,
I don't know. Sometimes you hear like old Republican Americana guys like they love Teddy, but maybe they didn't. He was an
yeah, I'm not
environmentalist
sure it's the
himself.
same guys, but maybe
Okay,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I mean, I would hear neocon people celebrating Teddy Roosevelt, but maybe not. Um,
I don't think this has been one of the worst. Of course, it has been, but just to confirm it from a scientist's point of view, the worst like 3 to 5 years as far as damage by climate change has been, not only in this country, but I mean, snow in Saudi Arabia. I mean, please, you know.
Yeah, I mean, so we do a thing called attribution studies where we try to say, what did this event have to do with climate change? And it depends on the event. So I think with heat waves, it's pretty clear. With fires, I think it's pretty clear. With snow in Saudi Arabia, I don't really know. With tornadoes, it's tougher. So I mean, it's the attribution is complicated, but I think what we can say is the planet definitely keeps getting hotter and hotter. That's plain. Some types of events are definitely getting worse. There's others that maybe we don't understand them as well. And for sure in the United States, the number of big disasters has gone up and up and up. That's definitely not all climate change. Some of it is just more and more people living in dangerous places. So, hurricane damage, the Miami hurricane of 1926 did a lot of damage, but if it hit today, it would be way, way, way worse.
And DeSantis, he likes to use that as an excuse to saying, "Hey, it's just more people," and
Well, it's not totally wrong. It's one of those.
Not totally
things.
wrong, of course.
It's true, but a little misleading. I mean,
I think it's definitely direct guiding the public perception.
Yeah. No, the ideological thing is very tough, and scientists, we're not good at sort of political street fights. Turns out.
Sad.
Well, because my brother's a scientist, so so one thing I recognize with him is he really pauses and he's very hesitant to give these non-scientific predictions.
Right.
So he's very committed to the scientific method. So,
right.
But he will also say, yes, this is the trajectory or this is what our predicted trajectory kind of looks like, but he's not going to double down.
What's his field?
Epidemiologist, CDC.
Oh,
so well, so it's interesting because the first Trump term, Tom Friedman was kind of his boss and who's one of his heroes. And when Trump was when they're setting results based on COVID and the White House had sent back, well, we don't like these results. It was kind of, that was like, what the fuck? The results are the results. I mean,
the beginning of COVID and the epidemiologists on social media was just really tough to watch because we totally understood what they were going through. These poor scientists and doctors posting this information about this horrible pandemic that's happening, and they're getting attacked by people, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, what the fuck? What do we do? We're just trying to tell you guys what the science is, and everybody's yelling at them like they're doing something wrong. And the climate scientists are watching it being like, sorry guys, welcome to our world. We've been there for decades, and it was really, but the epidemiologists weren't used to that. It never happened to them before. Well, so they were in shock.
It did start, according to my brother, when they started treating gun violence, say like in the United States, when we start killing each other, when they started kind of looking through the lens of epidemiology of that being an epidemic, and
right.
That's when the gun lobby came storming in, like you can't talk about this. So they started feeling it there, and then of course the COVID. I mean, one thing was the anti-vaxxer movement was very intense, and my brother's always saying, there think it's a conspiracy with Big Pharma. He's like, no, Big Pharma doesn't like vaccines. Big Pharma likes forever
endless disease, endless disease.
Drugs. Prescription drugs is
right.
What is
well,
really
I don't know
what
if they don't.
Well, no, it's changed. They added new contracts. Now it's changed a little bit, but historically they much preferred pills.
Right. They're not anti-vax, but I think vaccines usually aren't big money makers for them.
No, right.
Yeah.
If it's one and done or two and done, that's not really.
Yeah,
where they're going to side. Anyhow, but all right.
Well,
so
now we have the one of the dumbest, and he admitted he had a brain parasite, and we see the result of it. Who's now in charge of the nation's health? Who's anti-vaccine as measles uprise, which is ridiculous. And okay, it's not that many people; it's under 300, but that's where it starts. And as it being one of the most contagious diseases in America, at least, it's probably not going to stop there. And why people who probably were vaccinated as kids, because we all had vaccinations, we just didn't know what they were, never got any of these, never got measles, chickenpox, or any of this, why they have become so against it, just due to bullshit propaganda and another ass clown in position of power that, suggests you shoot bleach to get rid of COVID. I mean, we are between the uprise of disease, stupidity, and natural disasters. Well, we're pretty fucked. And we're just pretty kind of fucked. Um, where do you think the worst effects? I mean, the thing is, of course, America's having tragic devastation from all these storms, the tornadoes, the hurricanes, the forest fires, the droughts. But so are really a lot of poor countries in other parts of the world that are having devastation caused by, the amount of abuse we do to the environment, that might have more people but less so-called damage, and they're being completely afflicted as well. I mean, where do you think some of the worst problems are right now, considering whatever you want to call climate change to be at the moment?
Yeah, I mean, I'm most concerned about the tropics and subtropics. I mean, the hottest parts of the world, because as you get hotter, I mean, there's impacts everywhere. I mean, there's going to be impacts everywhere. The coasts as the sea level rises, the United States
high
is
density, high
by no
density and
means
poverty.
immune.
High
But
density
yeah,
and poverty. Yeah.
well, it's just if you're already hot, there's places in the world that are already hot, that are already, hot enough to be on the edge of where you want to live. I mean, the hottest places in the world, places that have the most heat extremes is probably Middle East, South Asia,
Yep.
Arabian Peninsula. And there's some studies that suggest within decades, these places will be experiencing uninhabitable temperatures. I mean, temperatures that you can't survive outside for very long on a regular
Adam,
basis. And how soon that happens,
Yeah.
we can argue, but
Well, some places
that's
are
where
already
we're
having
headed.
140 degrees. I mean, parts of the Middle East, I mean, they're having 130, 135 degree, blasts. You
well,
can't,
beyond
you
that,
can't.
though, one scenario that I've read about is, there's already tension between Pakistan and India, and a lot of their water sources, what I've read, come from the Himalayas, and these glaciers are melting. And
Yes.
the extreme a combined population between the two of them, it's like 1.4 billion or 1.5. It's like, and they already hate each other. So, and they both have nukes. So,
Right.
once there's no water, and you already have an old tension, wars and tension, political tension. I mean, there's so many other things that can happen besides just, hey, it's too hot to live here. It's like,
Well, and water is a concern all around. I mean, water in general and the amount of pollution, no matter where it's from. I mean, if it's from the Himalayas or if it's from the Catskills or it's from any of the oceans, there's already so much damage done that, especially countries with less ability to so-called purify. They say the water is so good in New York, it tastes good, but it's going through lead pipes. So what do I know? But, you know, water
sometimes.
is a
Well,
is
yeah,
a is a coming war.
Yeah, I mean, I'm less worried about the Catskills than the Himalayan glaciers, but I
Yeah.
mean, but you raise an important point, which is that, I mean, I feel like, this problem, the climate problem, would be, maybe manageable is too strong a word. Like, what's really scary is the combination of that and other human problems, like starting wars, and other things might kill us quicker.
Overpopulation.
Overpopulation. It's interesting. Overpopulation seems to be less of a worry. A lot of the countries are now worried about underpopulation.
Well, that's just
economic.
ridiculous.
That's economic.
That's ridiculous.
It's not so ridiculous in Korea, where there's like no kids being born.
Well, that's good. I salute.
Well, somebody has
Don't
to.
need more people. Well, they can import plenty of people from elsewhere. Thing is, let me rephrase that. Not so much overpopulation, but repopulating certain areas where people go to seek whatever, relief from the place they're from. So, and like you were saying before, like parts of the South, which we never had as many people as they do now, then the devastation is going to be far worse when so many more people are being wiped out.
So we're already seeing the weaponization of people who are immigrating based on being displaced for whatever reason, war,
right?
And so then environmental displacement is where it's like we're just beginning, and so what's that going to look like? Like,
it's not going to look like anything in America because Trump is banning everyone from every other country from coming in. So it's going to be the rest of the world's problem.
Right. So we burn as much fossil fuels as possible and heat up the planet, and then tell everybody else in the hottest places they can't come here. Yeah.
What do you do? Well, I always say, you burn down your neighbor's house and you're crying when they knock on your door.
So, right. It feels a little.
You say that electric cars suck, and then you buy one from your best buddy. Fuck off.
Yeah, let's not look for consistency.
So fucking stupid. Yeah. Yeah. What can the individual actually, you know, my theory is always you got to watch where every dollar goes because it's mainly going into the pocket of the rich cunts we don't want to support. But now that they have, monopolized almost every business, unless you can privately recycle with friends or grow your own food, which is impossible for most of us, we are buying and paying into the hands of corporate kleptocrats. But what can the individual actually start doing in even the smallest way? And that's why I say, even watch where every dollar goes. That's a start. Can we do to understand where we are now? What can we do to prevent, any further damage just on a small, unique, personal level? What can we do? Of course, stop buying bottled fucking water, people. Boycott it, but can we start there?
Yeah, bottled water is unnecessary.
What a great scam. Maybe the greatest scam of the last
Well, and
century.
also gaslighting the environmental movement, the recycling. It's like it's your responsibility to the consumers. Like, well, no one
And the
asked
lie
for
that it
millions
works.
of bottles.
Yeah. The lie that they were recycling when quite often they were not. The lie of fast fashion, where when all these fabric stores are closing because nobody makes their own clothes because they buy cheap shit and then they just send it off to the trash heap, which ends up in Chile or somewhere else. That's another huge environmental problem, is just the debris of garbage we all create. Anyway, that was a question for you, Adam.
The question was, what can we do?
Not my
Yeah.
monologue.
Like, what
What can
we
the
do?
individual, small things, what can we do?
Yeah, I always feel people ask me this, and I always feel like I never have a good answer. I mean, be politically active is the first thing. I mean, I think that's actually more important than any single environmental action. I mean, I'm trying to burn less carbon. I mean, for my job, I've flown a lot. I'm trying to do less of that where I can. Um, so you can think of we recycle. I mean, my wife's a big environmentalist going way back, so we recycle and dutifully and compost and do all those things, and I think that's good. But I think the biggest, but I think these problems are really fundamentally collective action problems, and the individual stuff is good to do, but it's not gonna,
Right.
if
Collective community outrage.
yeah, I mean
And there seems to be a pushback. Like how dare anyone tell what kind of lifestyle you should live, which is just tricking people into still being irresponsible. It feels like, not only are we not really doing, we're pulling out of the Paris, whatever, and
Climate Accord,
we
yeah.
feel like we're accelerating it. We're
Yeah.
not like stopping what we did. We're actually continuing at a harder rate than what we
right.
where
That's
we
the,
were.
that's the
I
Trump
think-
approach. Yeah. Actually, like, it's not just, don't bother us to burn less fossil fuels, but it's like burn more. Like,
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
glamorous or something. Yeah. I don't know. It's
Well, there
Well,
was
really-
also, look, the difference between America, for the most part, most of the states, and that of European countries is a lot of European countries have far better public transportation. Since America, one of the great, goals, everybody have a car, everybody live in a house, don't know your neighbor, be isolated, and all this other crap, and consume as much as possible is just part of the American mythology of the endless carrot dangling to pay again into the pockets of kleptocrats while you become more isolated. One person in every fucking car. How many cities in America do not have public transportation? A lot, or decent public transportation.
Well, that's a
And if
good
you think
point.
New York City's public transportation is good, I haven't seen the amount of rats down there. And that is a crime in a city this rich. Too many cars, too many rats.
Hard.
Clean up the subways.
But you're right, Lydia. I mean, in the sense that that's what I mean by it's a collective action problem. I mean, because we could tell people don't drive so much, take public transit. That would be a great thing to do. But if the public transit doesn't exist, you can't do it. So it's the infrastructure.
Right.
There does need to be a government role to set up a system that allows people. And it's not as though we all have to live in deprivation. You just have to have a system with infrastructure set up that allows a less
right, the access. And Los Angeles is one of the biggest. I mean, that's just so criminal that a city that big and ever sprawling has the shittiest, if it's barely
Well, they just
non-existent.
destroyed. So it's not just they don't have the infrastructure.
Already have a car.
There are outside interests to destroy the plans for one or pre-existing ones. I know, like the Rockefellers, there was a certain patent they got through. But basically, once they realized, oh, here come the automobiles, and we're gonna make so much money out of this shit, they politically went around and made sure all these trolley tracks and all these cities
Yeah,
were ripped up.
that's
and,
true.
and so it's so there are, yeah, again, there's no existing infrastructure yet. There are forces to make sure there is none, or they're going to destroy ones that exist.
Well, and it's interesting also that while a lot of European countries are going forward with the understanding that climate is a problem, the understanding that pollution is a problem, the understanding that forever chemicals in everything is a problem, public transportation is needed, we are going backwards. This is a problem. It's why I left the country first under Bush, and the time might be coming soon to do it again, because
Yeah.
there's only so much any one person can take, or any one person can complain. Still getting paid to complain, though. Got to. Come on.
Where are you going to go?
Don't
Yeah,
ask.
there is
This
no
time I'd be
perfect place.
followed.
There is no perfect
Well,
place.
no, and I'm never looking for the perfect place. It's just a respite from this bullshit, because this is really becoming unseen, unheard, unbelievable in the amount of liberties. And but the good thing is this, I have to say, in spite of all that, we all know we are devastated by the orange ass clown and his autistic good buddy. The thing is, he's getting shot down on almost every fucking way. He's trying to stick his
We will
tiny mushroom
see.
dick. All the judges are coming down, but the thing is, that's not good
not
enough. There
listening.
has to be
They're not even-
incarceration.
Yeah.
So
Send him to Venezuela.
Adam.
Send him to El Salvador.
Adam,
Big house into the White House.
what is like a average work day look like for you? Are you mostly indoors, or do you like go to areas? Do you go to like the polls? Do you travel with your work, or are you kind of just doing all data stuff? I don't know. What does your work look like?
So, well, first of all, it's all threatened now because the Trump
Sure.
administration is attacking science
Absolutely.
in a big way. But what it has looked like up to now, I don't do a lot of field work. There are people who do. I've done some. First of all, I don't go to the polls because my field is the tropics rather than the poles. That's just my science. So I have been involved in some field programs where, you go somewhere to make some special measurements on a ship or an airplane or whatever. I'm usually not the one on the ship or the airplane, although I have been a couple times. But most of the work that I do is on the computer. So the data comes from the whole planet.
Yep.
And it's observations from satellites and weather balloons and wherever, that's all mixed together. And then we do numerical simulations. So we have computer models that we use as both for prediction and for understanding, because we don't have laboratories. You can't do experiments on the planet.
Sure.
You can't change something and see what happens. So we do that on the computer instead.
And so is AI just taking it to the next level? Are you using a lot of AI at this point?
That's a really apropos question. I am not using AI yet, but that is almost certainly going to change. It has hit my field in a big way in the last few years. So the way your weather forecasts are made historically is with models that use physics. So basically, they're big computer codes that know about the laws of physics, how the air moves and so on, and that start with the measurements of the weather now, and then they march forward into the future. And that's the technology that started being developed around and just after World War II, and it's gotten steadily better. In the last few years, there are and really just the last few years, I mean like 3 to 5 years, there's suddenly AI models that can do it. And what they don't use physics at all. They just look at all the weather data in the past, and they're just finding patterns, just the way with anything else. So like, okay, when the weather was like this, then what was it like after that in other times?
Yeah.
It's totally
I need an algorithm of the weather. Wow. Yeah.
Well, both of them are algorithms, but one is physics based and one is not. So it's just really different how they work.
Interesting.
In the same way that ChatGPT, like, it doesn't really understand language in the way that you do, but it can find patterns in data.
Yeah.
So that's like the difference, So AI weather prediction is now as good as physics-based weather prediction by many metrics, or maybe even better. It's really,
and that's exponential, right? It's
huge, so fast. It's
happening. Is there an AI prediction on how more efficient AI predictions will be?
That's really interesting. My understanding is that I'm not an AI expert, okay, but I read about it, and
I want that answer. Yeah.
And I think that the AI companies are using AI to make AI better. I mean, AI is really good at writing code, computer code, and it's I mean, what they can't seem to do, unless this has changed, a problem for AI, like the large language models that like ChatGPT and so on, is that they need data to be trained on, and so they have to they have to ingest all the world's books and podcasts
Yep.
and magazine articles and
In
everything,
like 1 second. Yeah.
and they're kind of running out of stuff. Like they've eaten everything they can get without
Oh,
having
so it might be
legal problems.
self-cannibalizing. Yeah.
Right. So the question is, can you have train AI on other AI? And last I was reading about it, my understanding is that doesn't work too well. Like eventually it starts to deteriorate.
It's
It's
like
like
feedback.
making too many copies of a tape for those of us who are old enough to remember
Yeah.
physical cassettes. But who knows? I mean, maybe they'll figure out a way to. I mean, it's the one thing I understand about AI is it's a mistake to say such and such can't be done, because then in a year they'll do it. Like it's really, really astonishing.
It's insane.
Well, the one thing I wish AI could do was correct the fucking brain damage that so many politicians have right now, whether it's from religion, bad diets, or just the stupidity of greed and kleptocracy and a need for fucking power. I think that we need an AI that once you open it, it just erases the damage already done and then replaces it with actually a thinking, concerned, caring, intelligent human being. I know I'm wishing for too much, but that's just me. Sometimes I do have hope, but not for us like Kafka.
They're not programmed for that, Lydia. They're not programmed.
You want the AIs to be, once they start to really be intelligent and have personalities, you want them to be good and not evil. I mean,
right.
we've all seen, the dystopian sci-fi, movies and how that plays.
Oh, yeah.
Most of us read 1984 and it's here. So, I mean,
So let me ask you, because I don't know anything about meteorology, but wind is a mystery to me.
I love wind. Oh my God, I love the wind.
So going to your concern about the fires, obviously wind keeps these fires going and it spreads it more.
Yeah.
But is the wind getting worse? I'm not talking about more hurricanes, but in general, is the wind getting worse?
I don't really think so. I mean, hurricanes are getting stronger.
Right.
The tornadoes.
The Santa Anas tornadoes are it's not as clear, but that's a longer story. But
they had 135 to 165 mile an hour winds just this past weekend. I think that's pretty strong for a tornado. Just saying.
Oh, sure.
The devil winds. The Santa Anas, yes.
Yeah, the Santa Anas. I don't know if there's a global warming signal in those or not. I mean, generally speaking, on the scale of the whole planet, the place that is warming the fastest is the poles, and so that reduces the temperature difference between the equators and the poles. And at a sort of very large scale, that actually you might expect that to actually slow the winds down. But I don't think we've really observed that clearly at this point, and I don't know whether that's even a really true prediction.
What is the science of wind? I honestly don't even know. Like where does this come from?
It's just the most beautiful and mysterious,
one person sneezes,
dangerous
and then
thing.
This whole kind of a snowball effect.
Quickly, Tim, let me just say this. Once Tim and I were on a ferry and the wind was so strong, we were the only two to go out there. We could have been blown overboard, but fortunately it was blowing us toward the ship. But I just love the wind. But of course, and I have been in a few minor hurricane, a couple of earthquakes, but wind is a glorious and mysterious force that is doing an incredible amount of damage. Mother Nature.
When it's very strong, yeah, it can be a source of energy.
Where does it come? Well, it comes from what?
I think fundamentally it comes. I mean, I think the main place wind comes from is the fact that the sun falls unevenly on the planet. So because it's like you imagine kind of, heating one side of a room and cooling the other side of it. You'd make a circulation, like the air would naturally circulate because it sets up pressure differences and that drives the wind. Now on the Earth, also because it's spinning, that turns the wind sideways. It's called the Coriolis force. And so, I teach classes on this, so I could go on for a long time, but I've learned that people's patience doesn't.
So in your class, if someone
wild is the wind, I love the wind.
When you have a test in your class and someone fails or does well, you hand them the results and go, you win some, you lose some.
Have you ever been caught in any extreme climate thing? I mean, like an earthquake, like a tornado, like a hurricane, like just a massive windstorm
I've never been in it. I've never been in a tornado, thankfully. I've been close enough to them to see some pretty dark, scary skies and some stuff blowing around, but I haven't been in one. I've been in a couple hurricanes, not super powerful ones, but I mean, Sandy, I went through in New York City. That wasn't so bad as a
That
wind
was this ocean
event, but
surge, and
it was an
yeah.
ocean surge event. Yeah.
The insurance companies made sure it wasn't called a hurricane by the time it wiped out the Barrier Islands. It
Oh,
was a
that's a long story.
tropical
That
storm.
I actually wrote a book about this, so yeah,
Oh,
I can talk
okay.
about Sandy for a long time.
Okay.
And insurance companies are, I actually work with the insurance industry to some degree, so who decides if it's a hurricane or not is actually not them. It's the National Hurricane Center, but that's
Criminal
Everyone's
enterprises.
paying attention when they.
no, the National Hurricane Center is not a criminal enterprise, and the insurance industry is not either. I
They're
mean,
not the National Hurricane Center, no, but the insurance companies now. And
well,
it's going to be
yeah.
made even worse with the cutting off of the balls of whatever or not FEMA was good or not good. I mean,
Well,
what
that's
the
another
hell is going
thing.
to
That's a
happen?
whole other thing.
What is
That's
going to
another, yeah.
happen to all of these people? And the thing is, until it wipes out Mar-a-Lago, which trust me, the only prayer I have every day is do it, please, Mother Nature. I'm begging you. Is there going to be any difference? Because there is so many people just in the last year alone that have been so affected by devastating climate issues.
Yeah.
Millions and millions of people.
Yeah. Well,
What's your
yeah.
book on Sandy? I want to.
It's called Storm Surge.
Perfectly.
Okay.
And it's still available as an ebook. I think it's not in print anymore, although there's used copies kicking around. I wrote it a couple years after the storm. I mean, Sandy changed my life. I was an academic scientist, but then when Sandy was coming to New York, I was suddenly like in the media a lot, starting before landfall and then after, and it just kind of changed my whole perspective because, I was just a researcher doing my thing, but suddenly, even though I believed that our science was important, it's just sort of a different thing when you have real people asking you, what happened, and
Sure.
I ended up so yeah, I ended up writing a book about it, and it set me on a path that ultimately led to the Sumner podcast because it got me more engaged talking to the public and doing more things, and I started writing in the media, and the podcast was an outgrowth of that, and yeah, so it all led to this. But yeah, Storm Surge is the name of it. I think it's pretty good, but wasn't a big fan.
I was one of the last flights to land around Hurricane Sandy, come back to New York to start working with retrovirus, which Tim Dahl eventually joined. So I have
Oh,
a unique relationship to Sandy myself.
oh wow.
But
Where did you live? Did you lose power?
pardon me?
Did you lose power? Depends where you
No, I
live.
mean, I wasn't even living here. I just came in and I was staying in Greenpoint with a friend, but I had been living in Europe, so I wasn't living here at the time.
The light stayed
But
on in
I
Greenpoint?
came to start,
Not everyone
doing
in
things
Greenpoint.
again.
Not everyone in
Pardon me?
Greenpoint. I was in Midwood, Brooklyn, but just south was totally devastated. Marine Park and all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
And I made the arrogant mistake of after a couple days hey, let's go see the damage on Rockaway, and then it's like, you know what, I need some gas now, and I'm like, oh no, I can't get gasoline.
Right.
And it was like 10 days. It was like really hard to get
Staying with my
gasoline.
friend Shani Ray in Greenpoint, I have to say they weren't that affected. But Bob Bird, who was part of Retrovirus, he had some serious flooding in Hoboken. Well, we have
Oh,
been
Hoboken,
spared in
yeah.
New York. We've been spared in New York for quite a while now. The repercussions of things, all of the storms that are blowing, they seem to miss us. I mean, Tim and I just drove through 2 weeks ago the blizzard, the ice storm of Toronto, Rochester, the Catskills. But that's what we do. We're road dogs. But it didn't hit New York. I mean, New York is somehow holding out. I guess they're waiting for the next big one, and I hope it's not coming soon. But the whole country is under a state of
Adam,
emergency.
going to sea levels rising.
Mm.
I mean, okay, again, you're a scientist. You don't want to give this answer, but living this close to the ocean, I mean, kind of scary. I mean, I wouldn't live in a barrier island. I mean, it's very nice out in Rockaway, but I would be
Right.
That seems like a tremendous
Right.
risk.
Well, the barrier islands would be risky even without sea level rise,
Right.
but the sea level rise makes them more. And the barrier islands are interesting. In the ice age, so whatever 12,000 years ago,
They come
the
go,
sea
right?
level was much lower because
Right.
so much of the water had was in the ice sheets, and then as they melted, the sea level rose, and the barrier islands are actually kind of leftovers from that. They're places where there was like a high sand dune down on the beach close to the ocean, and then the water kind of filled in behind the dune. But the barrier islands they should naturally be moving. as the sea level rises, just due to rebound from the ice age. So because
Sure.
the Barrier Island is basically a sand dune,
Sandbar.
a sandbar,
And
and so they should be getting washed towards the shore. But the problem is when people build on them, now suddenly you got to keep it in place. You got to protect it. So it's a problem, and sea level rise just makes it worse. So yeah, the Barrier Islands are dangerous, and anywhere that's really close to sea level, is at some degree of risk.
yeah, I mean, the
now.
Army
I've
Corps
never
of
thought of
Engineers
that.
try to
Yeah,
deal with that.
I've never thought of this before, but because we know that there are great massive storms and waves in the middle of the ocean. But is there any kind of undersea, deep sea climatic or storms? I'm just wondering if there's
Well,
deep sea storms.
There's definitely different currents going in different
Yeah.
depths and all that stuff.
Yeah.
There are, but the currents way deep in the ocean are pretty
Steady?
slow mostly.
Yeah, sure.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's warming up down there gradually,
Right.
but the heat takes a while to filter down from the top of the ocean where it first happens to down there. But
Yeah. Top
my
of the ocean is
understanding
still dangerous.
yeah, the ocean, it mostly moves because it's pushed by the wind, and the wind is on the top of it, obviously. So the deep ocean mostly doesn't have super strong currents. There are probably some exceptions, and over sea
Maybe
mountain-
we should be exploring deep ocean living instead of going to Mars. We started with
wow.
Mars.
Great
That is the
idea.
band. And now we've got an idiot that thinks we should go to Mars when there's enough problems on this planet to try to solve. So people could, he only wants to go there to colonize with the children he doesn't have, except for by turkey based or IVF. And you know what? The first one I want to go to Mars is Elon Musk. So I do hope he makes it there. As quite frankly, I'm sick of his nonsense.
He ain't coming back if he goes.
Anyway, he ain't coming back. And good luck with the astronauts who are supposed to come back on one of his spaceships. I'm just saying, thank you so much, Adam. This is the Lydian Spin. Adam Sobel, check his podcast, Deep Convection, not only science on climate change, but also the Sumner Crane archives, which are coming in very important on both fronts.
Thanks so much, Lydia. Thanks.
Well, I mean, one thing, Lydia, though, about the ocean storms, there are like clockwork, like a kind of like Old Faithful thing, whirlpools at different points of the ocean that are, and I think
I'm going deep.
Yeah.
I'm going
There's
deep.
There's vents where hot water comes out, and
the hydrochloric. Oh, the
hydro.
Oh, I love the hydro vents. Oh,
Yeah.
it's always warm down there. Everybody smokes.
Extremely.
All right. Thank you. And thanks and good luck with the Sumner Crane archives. I'm sure I'll be up on one soon. We already talked.
Oh yeah, you're going to be out very soon, and it's called the podcast, as you said, is called Deep Convection, but the series within it I'm calling the Sumner Files. And yes, your episode's going to be out in a couple of weeks, Lydia.